All right, everyone, welcome. Now, if you're deep in your UPSC prep, you already know just how vital economics is. It's a big one. So, to help you out, we're starting a brand new series where we're going to break down the Class 12 Macroeconomics Ncert book, chapter by chapter. And today, we're starting right at the beginning with the incredible story of how macroeconomics was even born. Let's dive in.
So let's start with a really big question, one that even the father of economics, Adam Smith, was obsessed with. What is it that makes some countries rich and others poor? It's a huge puzzle, right? And the answer, well, it's not just about who has the most oil or gold. It's much deeper. It's all about how an entire economy works together as one big system. And that brings us to a really important split in how we study economics.
Yeah, to even begin to answer that question, you've got to zoom out and see the whole picture. The best way to think about it is like this. Economics has two main branches. You've got microeconomics, which is like looking at a single tree in a forest. It's all about individual players, one company, one family's budget. But then there's macroeconomics, and that's what we're talking about today. It's about stepping back and looking at the entire forest. It tackles the massive issues that impact everyone. Things like inflation, unemployment, and whether the whole economy is growing or shrinking.
But here's the thing, believe it or not, this big picture forest view of macroeconomics is actually pretty new. For a long time, the dominant way of thinking about economics was, well, it was completely different. It was way more optimistic, and it basically said, just leave the markets alone.
This was the core belief of what we call the classical tradition. The economists from this school of thought were absolutely convinced that the free market was like a perfect self-correcting machine. Their thinking went something like this. If people want to work, the market will automatically provide jobs. The idea that lots of people could be unemployed for a long time, they just didn't think it could happen. To them, it was just a small hiccup that would sort itself out, always.
With that beautiful, optimistic idea, that unwavering faith in a perfect market was about to crash head-on into a global disaster, a crisis that would shatter that belief and change the world forever.
And that event, of course, was the Great Depression. Starting in 1929, this wasn't just a recession. No, this was a complete and utter collapse. It started in the US, but it spread like a virus, pulling Europe and pretty much the whole world into a crisis that dragged on for over 10 years.
I mean, the numbers from this period are just mind-blowing. In the United States, the unemployment rate went from about 3%, which is pretty normal, to a staggering 25%. Let that sink in for a second. 1 in every 4 people who wanted a job just couldn't find one, anywhere.
And it wasn't just jobs. The total output of the entire U.S. economy, all the goods and services it was producing, fell by a whole third. Factories just sat there, empty. Businesses closed down for good. That perfect, self-correcting machine we talked about, it wasn't just broken, it was completely shattered.
In a picture like this, it really shows you the real human story behind those shocking numbers. These weren't just stats on a page. This was reality. This was people's lives. These long, desperate lines for food and aid, they became the symbol of a generation's struggle.
So what did the old theories have to say about this? Well, nothing. The classical economists were totally stumped. Their models had no explanation for a crisis this deep, this long-lasting. In their world, this wasn't supposed to happen. It became crystal clear that something was very, very wrong with the old way of thinking. A new idea wasn't just needed, it was an emergency.
And that new idea, that new way of thinking, came from this man right here, the British economist John Maynard Keynes. And get this, in 1936, right in the middle of all this chaos, he publishes a book that would completely revolutionize economics forever.
So what was Keynes's big revolutionary idea? Well, he basically said, stop looking at the individual trees. We need to understand the whole forest. He showed how everything, total demand in the economy, total employment, total production, was all linked together in this complex system. And just like that, from the ashes of the Great Depression, the modern field of macroeconomics was born.
Okay, so now that we have this new field, it's super important to realize that the theories Keynes came up with, and pretty much everything we're going to cover in this series, are all about understanding a very specific kind of economy.
And that system is what we call a capitalist economy. So what does that mean? At its core, it's an economy where most of the economic action happens through private companies, or as the book calls them, private enterprises. And what's their main reason for existing? What's the engine driving everything? It's all about one thing, making a profit.
So if we're going to break it down, a capitalist economy really stands on three main pillars. You got to have all three. First, private ownership. This means the means of production, the factories, machines, the land, it's all owned by private individuals or companies. Second, stuff is produced to be sold in a market, not just for the owner to use themselves. And third, there's a market for labor. People's work is bought and sold for a price, which we call a wage.
And this table, honestly, is a perfect summary of how this all works. You have the entrepreneur, right, the person taking the risk. They pull together the other three big factors of production. They use capital, which is the machinery and money, and that earns interest. They use land, which earns rent. And they hire labor, and the workers earn wages. So after the entrepreneur sells the final product and pays for all that, the interest, the rent, the wages, whatever's left over, that's their profit. That's the whole game right there. And that pretty much wraps up our look at the first chapter. It's an incredible story, isn't it? How a massive global crisis forced us to completely rethink how we see the economy. So to make sure all these foundational ideas have really sunk in, take a look at these questions on the screen. Give them some thought. They really get to the heart of what we covered today, and we'll be building on all of this in our next one. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you then.